Dear Indian friends, greetings from Bell'Italia 88 and welcome back. I am Caterina Brazzi Castracane, I am an historian and I am here in collaboration with the Italian Cultural Center in New Delhi. Today in particular I am here to share with you the conference of this month of February 2021 dedicated to the rediscovery of that city that was declared the Italian cultural capital for the year 2020 and also for the year 2021. We are going to talk about Parma, a sort of paradise between art and gastronomy. And the reason of this title is basically related with that idea that Parma, this small town in the north part of Italy, in that region called Emilia-Romagna, is obviously in one way an important and cultural city full of masterpieces realized during the centuries when it was not only a normal or undistinguished city inside the Italic peninsula, but when it was among the most remarkable capitals of the Western Europe. But in another way, there is also another Parma, a city with a specific and peculiar and also historical link with food, link so important to be declared by UNESCO Creative City of Gastronomy. And the idea that I would like to share with you is that Parma still today is the heart of the Italian food valley. And this also means that this is one of the best destinations where you can find the highest number of typical products protected with quality brands in Italy. The long history of this place found one of its turning point in the moment when the Roman consul Marcus Aemilius Lepidus decided to open an important way called Via Emilia to connect Piacenza to Rimini. And quickly the area around Parma was transformed to be the perfect stop along the Via Emilia. And really, the city became rich and prosperous, so prosperous that later, during the short Byzantine period, the city was renamed Chrysopoli, that just means city of gold. And it's obviously in this way that later the city was conquered by Goths, Lombards, and Franks, all different populations that were looking for strategical and powerful places inside the Italic peninsula. Actually, the most remarkable part of the history of this city is related with the Middle and Modern Ages, period when, first of all, during the medieval time, Parma first sided with the Holy Roman Empire against the papacy, and then a period when the city fell under important and aristocratical dynasties of Europe that ruled the city, transforming it from a normal and provincial city into a modern capital, and period that could be remembered for an important year, the year 1545, here when the important Pope Paul III, Paolo III, member of the Farnese family, and in this case portrayed by the master Titian in 1543, decided to put together the territory of Parma and the territory of Piacenza, creating an important duchy that he decided to give to his unlawful son Pierluigi Farnese. Pierluigi was declared first Duke of Parma and Piacenza, and with him, for this city, really started the age of modernity. Talking about modernity also means talking about an important and cultural period of renovation. And for us, it's also interesting to notice that a lot of different buildings that are today part of the cultural heritage of Parma were realized during that period, including important examples as the Ducal Palace or the Palace of the Garden, or the example of never completed palace, Palazzo della Pilotta, who still today house it inside this amazing Baroque theater named after the Farnese family, and that will be object of the second part of this lecture. Later in the time, when the Farnese family extinguished, the Duchy of Parma was given to the House of Bourbon, who ruled the city for a short period, also with the help of these important French figures, Guillaume Du Tillot, the man who really opened a second phase of cultural renovation for the city, and also the man who left the French sign in this city. French sign and French taste destined to be remarked also by the present in this city of Napoleon I, or later when, for the irony of the history, but also for the will of the Congress of Vienna, the second wife of the Emperor, Maria Luigia d'Austria, was named Duchess of Parma and Piacenza. And since that time, she became a myth of Parma, and a woman who really definitely transform this city according to the French taste. But there are a lot of myths of these cities, including a lot of genius who really transformed during the centuries these cities. Among them, we have to remember three important painters: Correggio, that is in front of us with important self-portrait, and with him Parmigianino, also in this case portrait in a self-portrait at the age of 12, and with them Lanfranco. Three important names in the history of art, three important painters that really were able to change the idea of painting between the 16th and the 17th centuries. But with them, we have to remember Giovan Battista Bodoni, the inventor of the modern typefaces, and three important figures linked with music: Niccolò Paganini, Giuseppe Verdi, and also Arturo Toscanini. The last myth that I would like to share with you is a family, an important family of Parma, the Bertolucci family. First of all, the man in the center of this fantastic picture, Attilio Bertolucci, one of the most important poets of the Italian literature of the 20th century, and his son Bernardo and Giuseppe Bertolucci, that were both important movie director in the international cinema. And while the city was growing to be the perfect capital of arts, it also linked its name to important foods and local products that really during the time transformed Parma into a synonym of gourmet and also of a city of pleasure. And so talking about Parma means also talking about the ham or other kind of cold cuts, including the culatello de zibello, that are still today protected inside this area. And is also talking about the Parmesan, the king of cheese, that is one of the proud of this city. But he's also talking about pasta, and in particular talking about the Barilla, because this famous brand was born in Parma at the end of the 19th century. All these elements are still today foundable inside an important system of museums dedicated to food that were opened in area around the city of Parma to create a sort of circle of gourmet, and also to be the touchable demonstration that gastronomy and food in general in Parma and in Italy is part of our cultural heritage. And this aspect is also present inside the historic center of Parma, because this part of the city is a sort of perfect place with a perfect balance between the presence of important buildings, churches, but also wine house and restaurants. And so discovering the historic center of this city is a sort of multisensorial experience that let us understand really what culture means. In particular, the historic center could be divided in three different areas. First of all, the area around Piazza Garibaldi here. Second time, the area around the cathedral, and the third one around the Palazzo della Pilotta, and in particular around the square dedicated to peace. The Piazza Garibaldi is interesting for us because it was once the site of the Roman Forum, and during the centuries it was transformed into the political heart of the city. And the square is still today dominated by the presence of these important buildings. First of all, the palace that is in front of us, that is the Palazzo del Governatore, or Ruler Palace, originally realized in 13th century, but completely redesigned and rebuilt in the 18th. But the palace still today is remarked by the presence of this important tower in the center of the facade. That tower that houses three different elements linked with the history of Parma. First of all, the bell in the higher part of the tower, bell that originally was part of a civic tower that collapsed in 1606. In the second part, this important niche with the figures of the Holy Virgin Mary and the Child, and the presence of two important sun dials dating back to 1829. Just 2 minutes walking from Piazza Garibaldi, we can discover the square of the cathedral, Piazza Duomo. This important public space dominated by the presence, among the other buildings, of these two beautiful examples of Romanic and Gothic buildings in Italy. The cathedral dedicated to the Assumption of the Holy Virgin Mary, and the baptistry. And in particular, the cathedral that originally was realized during the Middle Age but retransformed several times during the centuries is now remarked by the presence of this important bell tower topped by a gilt copper angel that you can see here in this part of the slide. And you have to imagine that this cathedral was realized to be completely decorated inside, to be the touchable representation of the Bible. And this really means that all the walls of the cathedral are completely covered with different kind of artistical masterpieces. And among them we have to remember, first of all, the important relief of Benedetto Antelami, one of the other important master link with Parma, and realized about the year 1180 to be the perfect icon of a Gothic taste and a Gothic representation of the deposition of Christ. And I would like that you see the relationship between Christ and his mother, and in this case the Holy Virgin Mary is here portrayed just petting the arm of Christ and using it to dry up her tears. This is the touchable representation of something linked with feelings, with pain, but also with love, a specific kind of love, the love between a son and his mother. But another masterpiece, completely different from the masterpiece of the Antelmi, is these imponent frescoes realized by Correggio for the dome of the cathedral. And in this case, he realized an important work of perspective with the aim to celebrate the power of God and also the moments while the Holy Virgin Mary is ascending to the sky. You have to notice the importance of this representation of light and body, where God is the center of an energy that is able to create a movement and a general celebration of the possibility to survive to death, arriving to the eternal life in the sky and in the kingdom of God. But also the baptistry was realized to be an icon of that time, and it was completely designed by the hand of Benedetto Antelmi, the same master of the deposition that we had already discovered inside the cathedral, and realized in this important octagonal form, completely just using pink Verona marble. The most remarkable aspect of the exterior of this baptistry is this zoophorus, so-called zoophorus, a sort of encyclopedic representation of strange animals and fabulous beasts, so popular during that Middle Age, and the real touchable representation of that strange world that was imagined during that time, just reading the holy books. And to enter inside this important building, were realized three different doors destinated to three different parts of the population. In particular, the first one was dedicated to the Holy Virgin Mary, here in front of us, sitting throne with the baby, and realized just with the technique of relief. The second one was called Door of Judgment, or door dedicated to Christ as the Redemptor, and the last one was dedicated to life and is dominated by this important tree of life in the center of the niche. The interior that was decorated with different kind of techniques just to celebrate the faith and the life of Christ is in this case important also because houses inside an important series of statues never completed, also realized by the hand of Benedetto Antelmi, that depthing the month and the season, and in particular among them I want you to see this important and allegorical representation of the month April. Here, a king, because April is the starting point of the year and the starting point of spring, that is the first season of the year. And in this case, the king is also important because he holds in its left hand a flower, a symbol of rebirth. You have to imagine that all the area around the cathedral was destined to be the religious district of Parma. And this also means that during the centuries, other buildings were rebuilt to be, together with the cathedral, the real center of spirituality and also of the power of church. And the three in particular are around this area, the building that is important to remember. First of all, the complex dedicated to San John the Evangelist. On the opposite side, the area dominated by the presence of the ex-monastery of St. Paul, and the last one, the area occupied by the Basilica di Santa Maria della Steccata, the outstanding masterpiece of Renaissance in Parma. And first of all, remember the complex of St. John. Is important also to notice that originally this important architectural complex was composed of four different ambients: the church, the monastery, the library, and also the old pharmacy. And all the complex was realized during the 16th century, but in particular in front of us there is the facade of the church that was in other way realized at the starting point of the 17th century, in accord with the Baroque taste so popular during that time. The facade is completely different from the austerity that you can feel just entering inside this cloister realized inside the monastery. This is, in another way, the perfect icon of that geometrical view of architecture so popular during that time. And the same aim was realized decorating this important ambient destined to house the library. And you have to imagine what means library during the 16th century, and destined to celebrate the knowledge of that time. The library and also the decoration inside the church, and in this case in particular another masterpiece by Correggio realized before working inside the cathedral, the dome of the church of St. John, are here in front of us to be the touchable demonstration of the power of art that was so real and so important during that time. And also in this case, Correggio realized a circular representation of power and light that is really something that could be called modern in a different point of view, when modernity was the aim to change really the idea of future. But another important part of this complex is the old pharmacy of St. John, originally a pharmacy founded during the 13th century and completely restored between the 16th and the 17th. The original ambient was divided in four different rooms, three for the public, the three that are in front of us here, and one destined only to the monks who ran the pharmacy until 1766. The first room was named the room of fire and was considered the perfect entrance of this pharmacy. The second one was named the mortar room, and the last one was dominated by the presence of these important wooden mermaids realized in accord of the taste of that time. The last room was a sort of secret room destined only to the monks, and now the place where her houses, alembics, and other kind of instruments that were used to create the modern concept of medicine during that time. On the opposite side of this religious district, we can find the area once occupied by the presence of the monastery of St. Paul, that here you are seeing in a virtual reconstruction of the original one. It's important to notice that this was one of the female monastery realized inside the city of Parma, and that it had his brilliant age between the 15th and the 17th centuries, when it was ruled by important female figures that really transformed this monastery into an important center of culture and power. Now is one of the important museum of Parma, because inside we find this amazing decoration of a chamber named after St. Paul, that was originally part of the abbess apartment and decorated for the will of the abbess Giovanna da Piacenza by the end of Correggio, to celebrate the power of her and the power of the monastery and the classicism in general. Correggio, in this case, a man who had spent some time in Milan, where he had seen the masterpieces by Leonardo, including the important decoration inside the Sforzesco castle called Sala delle Assi. Here used this representation of a garden to decorate the vault of this room, that was divided in 16 different segments using these important and late Gothic ribs that were used to celebrate the power of the abbess, that is here remarked by the presence of her cotton of arm in the center of the vault. But any segments was realized to be a perfect declination of the taste near of the classicism, and in particular Correggio realized in the higher part of this segment this important oval trompe-l'oeil opening place that he really filled of puss in playful poses, and you have to look the feeling between this Puto and the dog on his arms, while in the lower part of this segment he realized 4 marble lunettes with monochrome mythological figures in classical style. But the classicism is also remarked here by the presence of this important chimney, completely decorated with the figures of Diana on a chariot preparing for the hunt, the allegorical representation of the battle between the abbess Diana and the civil and religious authorities that during that time were so determined to reduce the political power of this convent, and with the same aim we can read the written on the chimney, Ignem gladio ne fodias, an original Greek by the philosopher Pythagoras, reinterpreted by the Saint Girolamo, and others that really could be translated as don't tease the fire with the sword, and in this case the fire is the fire of culture. But the last religious building realized in this district of Parma is Santa Maria della Steccata, a church transformed recently in basilica, realized by important architect of Parma with the influence of Donato Bramante, the master that during the same time was working for a similar example of a church, the Basilica of St. Peter in Rome. It's certain that during the work to build this important church in Parma arrived also Giuliano da Sangallo the Young, one of the architects that during that century used to work for the Farnese family. And in particular for this important temple of faith was called a master of that time, Francesco Mazzola, named Parmigianino from the city Parma, where he was born. He at that time was an important artist who had spent some time in Rome and Parma, where he had have a lot of different kind of experience, and he was not more the young boy that had chosen to self-portrait himself in this way, but he was in that moment the master that who had realized a masterpiece like this important portrait of Lorenzo Cibo, now housed inside an important museum in Copenhagen. This master for that time seems really the perfect master to realize that the huge decoration of this church, but it was so only apparently, because something went wrong, and the art historians ignore a part of this mystery. What we really know is that between the year 1531 and the year 1539, the master was able only to realize that this important decoration on the arch above the presbytery, a perfect representation of the theme of the wise and foolish virgins, but he not realized all the rest of decoration that was so important for the lenders of this church. We don't know why he arrived to neglect the other commitments. We certainly know that during the same time he realized this important and amazing masterpiece that is now housed inside the National Gallery of Parma, destined to be remembered have the representation of the Turkish slave. We also know that probably he was completely captured by his interest in alchemy, but what we know is the dramatic epilogue of this history, because finally the lenders of the church, who had already paid him for the works, were able to see him condemned to prison, and after 2 months that he spent inside prison, he left Parma, arrived in Casalmaggiore, another small city in the same territory, but during that time in another state, and there he died at the age of 37. We know that the church was finished by other masters, including Bernardino Gatti, who decorated the dome. But what we know is that the perfection of the decoration realized by Parmigianino is not possible to be compared to other important elements of the history of art, even because he realized all the details with his hand, including the golden leaves used to cover the architectural elements of the arch. This huge representation of beauty, of art, of knowledge is a sort of testament of Parmigianino still visible inside this important church. The last important part of this city is related with the area around the Pilotta Palace, realized to be the perfect complex that was destined to house the Farnese court, and realized originally to put together in one part of the creek the important apartment of the court and offices of the court, and on the other part of the creek the important and representative palace destined to the court. This important palace today is a cultural complex opening in front of this garden that was recently realized by the hand of an important contemporary architect, Mario Botta, and destined to house some of the masterpieces of this city, including the National Gallery, the Farnese Theatre, but also the Archaeological Museum, the Palatine Library, and the Bodoni Museum, the museum dedicated to the inventor of the modern typefaces. Among these important places, maybe the most remarkable is the Farnese Theatre, a masterpiece of Baroque theatre originally realized for the will of the Duke Ranuccio I Farnese in 1618 to celebrate the visit to Parma by Cosimo II, Grand Duke of Tuscany. In the reality, the visit never took place, and the theater was really open in 1628, year of the marriage between the daughter of Cosimo II, Margherita de' Medici, and the son of Ranuccio I, Duke Odoardo Farnese. For that important marriage, the theater was opening with this important representation with the music of the important composer Claudio Monteverdi. The piece was called and dedicated to Mercury and Mars, and the most remarkable aspect of that night is that the real piece was ended with a real naumachia organized inside the theater, pumping water from the stage. The genius and the director of this creation was Giovanni Battista Leotti, an architect and also an hydraulic engineer, the man who really realized this theater that could be considered the prototype of the modern playhouse. It was the first theater to have have a movable scenery element that later became so popular inside other example of theater. But the problem with this theater is that during the centuries it was abandoned because it was too expensive also for the cart and the organization of the spectacle inside was too complicated. But this was, in another point of view, the starting point of another life for this theater, because completely abandoned even after when the moment when the Duchess Maria Luisa d'Austria decided to open the Ducal Theatre, another important theatre of the contemporary Parma. The Farnese theatre was completely transformed into a sort of perfect place to pilgrimage, and also transformed into another myth of the Romantic period. And a lot of different prints or writers used to write important letters talking about this important myth of the past, until the moment when the theater was partially destroyed during the Second World War. And that was the moment when the municipality had to decide to destroy this part of the cultural heritage and memory of the city, or rebuild. The municipality chose to rebuild it, and finally the theater was reopened to public with an important night of music in the presence of the Mozart Orchestra and in the presence of the master Claudio Abbado, that realized an important concert inside the theater. And I would like to share with you just a minute of that night, because it is one of the pages of our history. Hearing the wonderful music of this important orchestra, we can arrive to the end of this conference. So, spending just a few words to the last period of the history of this city, because also the French influence is important to understand this city. And in particular, the city really changed during the period when it was under the House of Bourbon. And it's important to spend some word discovering this important French man, French minister, Guillaume Du Tillot, who really realized an important phase of cultural but also economical renovation of Parma, and that is considered another myth of this city. In particular, during his government were opened important cultural spaces, including the botanical garden of the Academy of Arts, but also the public library. And he was so important for one member of the House of Bourbon, Duke Filippo di Borbone, that he decided to name him Marquis of Felino. And Felino in this case is interesting to notice that is a castle but also a village near the area of Parma, but it is also an important and protected salami called Salami de Felini, that is one of the gourmet secret of this city. The armed arm of Du Tillot was this important architect, Alexandre Petitot, the man who really transformed and reorganized the city of Parma in accord to the modern view of a city. He is the man who really opened the first boulevard in Parma. This is the area where the boulevard was opened, and this important boulevard called Stradone ended with this important building realized to house an important cafe designated to fashionable circles, and also designated to be the perfect place where admire the city and the countryside around. But he also realized an important renovation of the Ducal Palace, also opening the garden to the inhabitants of this city, and he realized the same, transforming the important palace of Colorno on a perfect example of a fortress that during the centuries was transformed into the perfect aristocratical palace, and link with the figures of the Duchess Maria Luigia d'Austria, because it was one of the favorite place of Parma for her. And in particular, and we are going to end this lecture, she is really a myth of Parma. Also because she was a woman that for that time used to speak French and Italian, and also used to play piano, and also used to make gardening, and who had an important passion for the good kitchen. Parma was the perfect place for her, and actually it's important also to notice that the biography of Maria Luisa is full of different patients, also 3 husbands and 3 children during her life, and in particular she is linked with her passion for one flower, the violet of Parma. And we know that when she was in Schönbrunn, she was so in love with this flower. We can say that she has to her lady to give to her important examples of this flower that was destined to be the perfect icon of beauty and of female passion. And in particular in Parma, she used to cultivate the flower inside the garden of the Colomo Palace. And she was also the woman who decided to encourage the monks of the monastery of the Annunziata to try to create an important essence from the flower and the leaves of the violette. At the end, she was able to help them to find a solution, and actually the monks really invent the important parfum of the violet of Parma. And in this case, the parfum was named after the Duchess of Parma, and also one variety of this flower was used to celebrate hair and beauty. And still today, this is another important part of the cultural heritage of this city. So I stop sharing my screen to say to you thank you very much and goodbye. We will see again during the next month to discover together another important Italian city. Thank you very much to you and bye bye. See you the next time.